Start the stream. It says excellent connection. All
Should,
right.
should we get our sound thing going?
Yeah. Go ahead and start. We can do a 3-2-1 record and then 25 seconds of quiet, but I'm not going to do the 3-2-1 because I'm going to use the OBS recording to sync the audio, which is
So shall I?
another.
So shall I bother recording or?
Yeah, go ahead. The only thing I'm going to use the OBS recording for is to sync up the audio.
Okay. So press record and then 25 seconds of silence.
Yeah, hold on a minute though. Okay, so we're recording, we're streaming. All right. So 3-2-1 and then record and then 25 seconds of quiet.
Okay. 3, 2,
Whoa,
1.
hang on. All right, start over.
Okay. So 3, 2, 1. Record. Okay. So that's our. That's actually 30 seconds. But okay.
Yeah,
So let's start then, shall we?
let's do it.
Welcome to mintCast, the podcast of the Linux Mint community for all users of Linux. This is episode 419. This is episode 419.5, recorded on Sunday, August 20th, 2023.
Got my head in the clouds. I'm Bill.
And I've also seen cloudy days. I'm Majid. So, first up in the news. LXD Linux Containers forks LXD project as Incus. Indian Defense Services are switching to Linux. Mint's birthday is coming up. Messaging layer security. The state of Solus. Alarm raised over Mozilla VPN. EFF launches the Tor University Challenge. News on OpenZFS and ZFS Boot and Dev1 5. In security and privacy, Skidmap and Downfall. Then in our wanderings, Majid wanders around a lot of clouds, and Bill has maintained a dignified silence.
Thank you for that.
In our inner section, we talk a little bit about cloud storage solutions and attempt to demystify some of the procedures for hosting your own cloud storage. And then finally, we've got the feedback and a couple of suggestions. On to the news. Take it away, Bill.
All right, so first up is LXD or LXD, however you want to say it. Linux Containers Forks LXD project as Incus. That's INCUS. And this is by Michael Laraball over at Phoronix. Dated 7 August 2023. Following Canonical deciding to pull in control of LXD project and LXD maintainership being limited to Canonical employees, the Linux Containers Project has announced the forking of LXD as Incus. Incus is a fork of the LXD project created by Alexei Sarai, the developer known for his work on RUNC and other open containers projects. Alexei started this fork due to the recent canonical decisions around taking LXD away from the Linux containers umbrella. Incus is now going to be a fully community led alternative to LXD and hosted under Linux containers. The goal of Incus is to provide a fully community led alternative to Canonical's LXD, as well as providing an opportunity to correct some mistakes that were made during LXD's development, which couldn't be corrected without breaking backwards compatibility. In addition to Alexei, the initial set of maintainers for Incus will include Christian Bronner, Serge Hallian, Stefani Graber, and Tycho Anderson, effectively including the entire team that once created LexD. I apologize for screwing up those names, as I no doubt did. Uh, there is no clearly defined roadmap at this point. Incus will be tracking changes happening in LexD and will likely in time diverge from it as different decisions get made. A stable release of Incus is likely at least a couple of months away, so existing LexD users shouldn't rush to find a way to migrate quite yet. More details on the Incus project via today's announcement on linuxcontainers.org. And I don't find the whole thing with Canonical taking over LexD to be an unfortunate thing because from what I could tell, there was changes that needed to be made to that project that really couldn't be made because of the way um, Canonical was kind of leaning on it and leaning on some of the backwards compatibility. So it's almost like this is an opportunistic kind of thing with it, with them being able to fork it and then make some changes that they would have liked to have made in the past, but they couldn't. So now there's these two there's these two things that exist out there that can be used depending on what your use case is. So I mean that's the beauty of open source, isn't it? That if a project starts to diverge from what the original maintainers meant for it, that there's that option to fork it, and as long as the original version remains open source, you can always use that as a development base, I suppose. No sound. No sound.
As you said, that's the wonder of open source.
Yeah.
So it's just the way it works. Okay, anyway, moving on. Indian Defence Services are switching to Linux. So this is from It's Fast by Londoner, but it was originally reported in the Indian newspaper thehindu.com. In the past, we've seen governments trying to switch to Linux for their own administrative needs. Usually comes with its own set of challenges, however, ranging from interoperability all the way up to training the end users. And as it turns out, the Indian government is all set to take up the challenge once again by implementing an internally developed Linux distro. According to a recent report, the Defence Ministry of India has decided to replace Windows with an in-house developed Linux distro called Maya on all computers that are connected to the internet. While details are very slim on this distro, we know that it is based on Ubuntu and has been developed locally within a very short 6-month period. On this, an unnamed official from the Defence Ministry had this to add. Maya has the interface and all functionality like Windows, and users will not feel much different as they transition to it. That does sound promising because many users find it difficult to adapt to a new interface that's not like Windows. This should in theory help them to adapt to a Linux distro faster. India, like most countries, has to face cyber attacks on a daily basis. Those range from malware attacks all the way up to ransomware attacks, which have affected critical infrastructure in the past. Maya was specifically developed as a way to deter such attacks on critical infrastructure and features an endpoint detection and protection system called Chakravyuh, the details of which have yet to be ascertained. Initially, Maya will be installed on all internet connected computers in the south block of the Secretariat building in New Delhi. That block houses important offices such as the Prime Minister's, the Ministry of Defence, and the Ministry of External Affairs. But the Ministry of Defence will be the first one to get Maya. The official directive has already gone live with an August 15th deadline. It's good to see more and more governments are pushing for the use of Linux across critical administration agencies, and this is certainly a big push in India. In the case of India, the state of Tamil Nadu had previously decided to switch to another homegrown Linux distro called Boss Linux for their administrative needs, and that received appreciation from many. What an Indian sounding name for a distro. Anyway, we're looking forward to see how Maya performs and if we can see implemented for more common uses across the government. Now, London actually asked a addendum that Maya was previously the code name for Linux Mint 13 back in 2012. No connection with the doomsday theories from the ancient Maya civilization. It's in the name of Clem's daughter, and in Hindi, the word Maya means illusion or hallucination. So, I personally am happy that Linux is being used. I mean, why wouldn't I be? I'm a Linux advocate. I like it being used. I like free and open source use services, software source services to be used wherever they can be. My slight reservations about this news are, first, we have seen Linux being, adopted by government agencies and things in the past in other parts of the world, and it hasn't necessarily been smooth sailing. Munich is the thing that I'm remembering, and they had to switch back to Microsoft after a short-lived experiment with Linux. Secondly, I see some politics in this. There is a big one of the government narratives in India at the minute is this idea of Atmanirbhar, or self-sufficiency. The idea that India can be self-reliant for critical things. And it's part of the kind of new muscular nationalism that has been developing in India over the last 10, 20 years. And so this is exactly the kind of headline thing that the government would like. We are not using foreign software, we're using local software. And when you actually look at some of the reporting about this, that's kind of how it's been presented in the Indian press. We are no longer using foreign operating systems. We are now self-sufficient, and we can now develop our own software. Except it's a Linux distro, and so that's not exactly the way it works. But as I said, I hope I'm just being a bit negative, and actually, if things work out well for it.
It's funny you mention it that way, because when I first heard this, I had the same concern that I did back in Munich, which was that, once again, instead of taking a distribution that is purpose built, that has got a good maintainership, they're going and doing something. They're coming up with this in-house made distribution, which means that they have to be the ones that are controlling the whole stack from top to bottom, and as they need new tooling, they have to be the ones to come up with ways to fit that in, and how that goes.
Yeah.
As time goes on, you don't always have access to the right resources. There's always things in the way, and just like with Munich, eventually it became something that was so convoluted and unknowable that there wasn't anybody that could maintain it anymore. And
so I mean, I find it hard to believe that they're doing this completely on technological grounds. That they have sat down and thought, you know what, a free and open source solution based on Linux is the thing that we need. It's, as I said, it sounds more like a headline grabbing type of thing. I remember it was a couple of years ago now, the government were doing an initiative to encourage mobile phone use, in the really poorest, sections of society, and they developed their own smartphone, which was for like $20, the equivalent of $20, something ridiculous like that. Except it wasn't obviously their own phone. It was yes, it was locally made, but the software was basically a forked version of the Android open source project, and it died a death very quickly, because it's a good way of saying, look, we've done something, especially if people aren't as well informed. But so anyway, as I said, I hope I'm wrong. I don't always want to be the harbinger of doom, but yeah, I'm just not exactly convinced that this is being done for those reasons.
So you would probably say that the reason they wouldn't just go with something already made and well maintained and well supported, like Ubuntu proper, which is already ready to go and is built well and would do the job quite well, but that is made by the imperialist.
Well, I mean, yeah, but Yeah, the point being that they're not doing it out of a love for free and open source software. This is my point. It's a way of putting a headline of we are doing our own thing. We are self-sufficient now. Yeah, and if you think that post-truth facts are common in the States, you haven't seen India yet. Do you know what I mean? This is a place where, for example, I'm going to go on my soapbox here again, aren't I? This is a place where when after a state dealt with COVID really badly, when people started making comments, they said, oh, people are just jealous of how well we did it. And you're like, I'm sorry, did you not see the bodies floating in the river? But yeah, anyway, before we go ranting on too much about that, speaking of Mint, next Sunday, that's August the 27th, ironically a day I'm doing a 24-hour shift, will be Linux Mint's 17th birthday. Version 1 Ada was released way back in 2006, had a KDE desktop, was based on Ubuntu 6.06 Dapper Drake, and was called a beta. It was replaced 3 years later by version 2 Barbara, which switched to the GNOME desktop. I think the interesting thing about this, and I think the interesting thing about Mint when you look into Mint's history, is some detractors of Mint, and I've included myself in the past, I've been kind of like, well, it's just a kind of, nicer Ubuntu. In the sense of, without the kind of company edge, without the kind of, looking for profitability and angles. It's a more community-driven distro.
In those days, it was the way of getting an Ubuntu-based desktop with all of the working codecs and everything. And in those days, Ubuntu did not come out of the box with all of the codecs you needed to play DVDs or
no, exactly.
TVs, but Mint did.
Exactly. So my point is that actually, it's like, for example, wow, they're just copies of Ubuntu, or for example, right? Well, then you find out that, for example, Mint came up with a software store before Ubuntu did. Yes, you mentioned about codecs as an example. So I think it's Mint is older than people think, and Mint has a longer pedigree. And I'm not saying this as a fanboy, because as I said, I've only recently gone back to using Mint again. But if people are going to make comments, then you should be accurate comments.
Sometimes I think people make comments just to hear their own voice.
Yeah, well, as one of my friends very brilliantly put it, you have the right to your own opinion. You don't have the right for your opinion to be taken seriously. Which I just thought was fantastic. Yeah, anyway, moving on. Messaging layer security. Secure and usable end-to-end encryption. Oh, this is going to be a theme, end-to-end encryption, in this episode. So this is from IETF News. So the IETF has approved publication of messaging layer security, a new standard for end-to-end security that will make it easy for apps to provide the highest level of security to their users. End-to-end encryption is increasingly important security feature in internet applications and the cloud, let me add. It keeps users' information safe even if the cloud service they're using has been breached. For an app to provide end-to-end encryption, it needs an extra layer of cryptography that sets up encryption keys amongst the devices participating in a conversation, so that these devices can encrypt users' data in a way that cloud services can't decrypt. Before MLS, that's messaging layer security, not Major League Soccer, there was no open interoperable specification for this extra layer. MLS fills this gap, providing a system that is completely specified, formally verified, and easy for developers to use. MLS builds on the best lessons of the current generation of security protocols, like the widely used double ratchet protocol. MLS allows for asynchronous operation and provides advanced security features such as post-compromise security. And like TLS 1.3, MLS provides robust authentication, and its security properties have been verified by formal analyses. MLS combines the best features of these predecessors and adds on features like efficient scaling to conversations, including thousands of devices, without sacrificing security. Draft versions of MLS have been deployed at scale to prevent sensitive real-time conversation in WebEx and RingCentral communication products. Those early deployments provide validation of MLS's ability to work well in real world scenarios at the scale of major communication services. Other apps such as Wire, Weka, and Matrix are planning to transition to MLS, and IETF MMI working group expects to use MLS as the end-to-end encryption layer in their solution for interoperable messaging. This is just the beginning though. There are already a handful of MLS implementations, including multiple open source implementations. But more implementations will make it easier to use MLS in more places. Likewise, more deployments will provide valuable lessons on how future versions of MLS need to improve, and while MLS is a major piece of the end-to-end security story, there are still important pieces yet to be written. For example, creating a strong identity that can integrate with the authentication system and secret management systems that help users have a more seamless experience. So my question was, how user-facing is this? Are we going to be seeing well-known apps for communications using this kind of thing?
This sounds like the kind of thing that's probably well used. It's just it's enough layers deep that the end user may or may not know it, you know. But it's good that improvements are made on these low level on these low level things because, well, probably because we don't know
Mm-hmm.
that it's being used, you know. So yeah, I want to say it's got to be something like that because I have not heard of these things before now, named such as they are in this article.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's good news.
Okay. Carry on,
Uh,
Bill.
yeah, State of Solus, August 23rd. August of 2023, and it's from the Solus blog. Um, Now, Solus has been kind of uh, tumultuous, I guess you could say, over the last couple of years, and it's really good news that a couple of key people have moved back into that project. That all being said, the Solus blog goes on to read, longtime Solus users know that the project has navigated some choppy waters in the past with bus factor. Too much responsibility on too few shoulders has led to burnout, stalled work, and even extended project blackout. For Solus to continue long into the future, we need people to enjoy working on Solus, and we need it to be a team effort. In short, the new strategy is to spread responsibilities across a larger team, enabling individuals to fill in for each other as availability dictates. Our new processes enable us to seamlessly onboard new and offboard existing team members as necessary. Since our return in April, Solus staff has grown to a team of 16 volunteers, and we've been working on internal documentation and workflows so responsibilities can be readily shared. Case in point, to test our processes and documentation, we have been rotating the individuals to perform the package repository sync, with 11 out of 16 staff members having already completed the process. Solus staff is the umbrella term for everyone who has a role on the Solus team. Note that the roles are a different Note that the roles are a little different from what was laid out in the New Voyage blog post. As we have collaborated over the last few months, we found these were the roles people naturally fell into. The roles and their responsibilities are as follows: boring admin, be responsible for the financial side of Solus, in particular Open Collective, manage the keys for all important Solus accounts. Then the comms, these people reach out with news to the Solus communities and solicit feedback, moderate Solus communities to keep them friendly and useful, supervise work on help center documentation, infrastructure. These people maintain the services that are knitted together to make Solus services, hosting the homepage, help center, build server, the Dev Tracker, Forum, and others. Packaging. Push their own work, review work done by other packagers, and show new packagers the ropes. Coordinate weekly syncs with other packaging team members, infrastructure, and com teams. Web. These people work infrastructure to develop the sites and services that deliver Solus, particularly the primary web property, getsol.us, and the Help Center. At the end of the day, Solus is a Linux distribution, so we expect that most people will join Solus staff as packagers and take on other responsibilities as they wish. Solus staff, Solus staff as packagers and take on responsibility. Solus staff now includes the following people. Oh, here we go again. Alex Vorobiev, Algent Albrahimi, David Hardner, Evan Maddock, Fabio Forni, Gavin Zhao, Ike Doherty, Joey Riches, Joshua Strobel, Philip Trulson, Riley Brogan, Rune Morling, Silke Hofstra, Tracy Clark, Zach Bacon.
Interesting bunch of names, that. Isn't it?
Yeah. Where's Moss when we need him?
Yeah. Ike and Josh Strobel. I'm quite interested in all this.
Yeah. Well, those two are some of the pioneering members of the team, and it's really good to see them back.
Yeah, I got the feeling that when their involvement decreased, that's when Solus development kind of stagnated.
And you know, we've seen a lot of distributions come and go over the years. We really have, especially ones that are ambitious. And that ambitious is, to put it mildly, when it comes to Solus, because
Oh yeah, it's a complete Linux from scratch. It's starting
it is.
from the beginning. I mean, the only argument, not argument, the only thing I would say is I wasn't entirely sure what the value proposition of Solus was, but then that might just be my lack of knowledge of what it can be used for. But that was, I mean, when I've used it, I've quite enjoyed it.
The thing about a distribution like Solus is because of its relative small user base and I guess you could say small maintainer base, you have way better accessibility to the, well, I don't know if accessibility is the right word, way better access to the developers. So it can be, you as a user can be far more uh, meaningful in the process of maintaining the distribution. So it's almost in a way made for the people that use it, because the people that use it, it is really well tuned for the use cases that they have in mind for it. I've heard it's good for gaming, because when Ike was a part of the project in the past, he did a lot of work to uh, maintain some optimizations around gaming and that, and so it'll be real interesting to see how this project sort of evolves in the near and not so near future. But there a little bit more to this blog post. Other recent work includes Help Center content was moved onto a new standalone site at help.getsol.us. With this new Docusaurus based site, we can quickly review and incorporate changes suggested by anyone willing to send us a pull request or open an issue on the accompanying GitHub repository here. Please take a look around and let us know what you think. Launching the Solus Matrix space. We now have a public matrix room set up, migrating our old setup from IRC. All our rooms are listed in the Help Center. All Solus IRC channels have been retired except for hashtag Solus, which remains solely to direct people to Matrix. That's interesting. Um, but yeah, there again, I'm happy to see that project is it's they seem to be getting their finger out and getting well on their way. If we got nothing else on that, alarm raised over Mozilla VPN. Wonky authorization check lets users cause havoc. And this is from the Register. Updated a security engineer at okay, updated. A security engineer at Linux distro maker SUSE has published an advisory for a flaw in the Mozilla VPN client for Linux that has yet to be addressed in a publicly released fix because the disclosure process went off the rails. In a post to the OpenWall security mailing list, Matthias Gerstner describes a broken authentication check in Mozilla VPN client version 2.14.1 released on May 30th. Essentially, the client can be exploited by any user on a system to, among other things, configure their, configure configure their own arbitrary VPN setup, redirect network traffic to outside parties, and break existing VPN setups. That's no good on shared computers with multiple users. The issue was identified, said Gerstner, when an OpenSUSE community manager wanted to add a Mozilla VPN client to OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, a Linux distribution. The software was reviewed by the SUSE security team, a standard procedure, and they found the VPN software contains a privileged dbus service running as root and a polkit policy. Polkit, formerly PolicyKit, is an authorization API for privileged programs. The SUSE security team noticed that the privileged Mozilla VPN Linux daemon process had incorrect authorization logic. Citing the listed XML based Polkit policy declarations, Gerstner observed that the way the authorization check is written, the code asks Polkit to determine whether the privileged Mozilla VPN dbus service, rather than the user, is authorized to perform this action. Since the dbus service runs with root privileges, the authorization check always returns true. That means the dbus call will work for any user account regardless of privileges. The impact is that arbitrary local users can configure arbitrary VPN setups using Mozilla VPN and thus possibly redirect network traffic to malicious parties. Pretend that a secure VPN is present while it actually isn't. Perform a denial of service against an existing VPN connection or other integrity violations, said Gerstner. Gerstner also calls out the absence of any Polkit authorization checks for various other dbus methods like get logs, cleanup logs, running apps, firewall clear, and deactivate. These all execute functions that should be authorized. For example, it's fundamentally insecure to let any local account on a system deactivate another user's VPN. Responsible disclosure needs to work both ways. Polkit itself had a recent significant security issue, but the Mozilla VPN vulnerability is the result of improper implementation. What makes it noteworthy is the way the disclosure was handled. According to Gerstner, the issue was privately disclosed to Mozilla on May 4th, and SUSE heard nothing further until May 12th when its security team learned the flaw had been disclosed on GitHub pull request to the Mozilla VPN repo. We asked upstream once more what their intentions are regarding coordinated disclosure, but did not get a proper response, said Gerstner. Nonetheless, the SUSE team waited until Thursday, August 3rd, after 90 days had elapsed, to post publicly about the flaw, which Mozilla has now assigned CVE 2023 4104. Gerstner says Mozilla VPN plans to stop using Polkit authentication completely in the upcoming version 2.16.0 release, which does nothing to change the fact that all the dbus APIs remain unauthenticated and usable by any local user. Improved authorization is expected in version 2.17.0, which does not yet have a release date, but requiring the dbus caller to have the cap underscore net underscore admin permission or the UID associated with the user who activated the connection. This is expected in 1 or 2 months. As for the other potential information leaks described in the post, Gerstner says there is no word on how or when those will be addressed. Asked to comment, Mozilla spokesperson told the Register that while the timing is uncertain, the organization anticipates sharing more information on Monday. Updated to add, we acknowledge that our communication regarding this bug report could have been more precise given our commitment to be responsive and collaborative partners, a Mozilla spokesperson said in a statement to the Register. We have been working to implement improvements to address the issue, and as a result, will advance the timing of this fix in a special release of 2.16.1 for Linux on August 11th, 2023. Mozilla has also made public the initial bug report. You know, I use Mozilla VPN. In fact, I was using another product prior to that, and then when Mozilla came out with this, I thought, oh, well, that's a player in our space. I'd rather give them the money. And then, but I've always known that Mozilla's got kind of a mixed history of dealing with what the community expects the communication process to look like whenever something like this happens. And the problem is that you would expect a company with resources on the level of Mozilla to be able to provide a bit better communication. But once again, it's big company choosing to do what the lawyers say, because I'm sure I have absolutely no doubt that when it came to light that you had these vulnerabilities, the first thing that happened was somebody called the lawyers, and there was a dozen like subcategorical conversations and decisions that had to be made before anybody from Mozilla was authorized to say a word about any of this. And that's the unfortunate thing about projects that are ran by large companies. But
isn't it relatively new as well?
It is. I think I've been using it since nearly day one, and it's maybe a year.
So, I mean, is it a surprise that there's some problems? I mean, every service has, I don't want to call them teething issues, but, there are problems that come up. And, only when things go live, however much testing you do beforehand. So, yeah, I mean, is it just a reflection of the fact that it's a relatively new product?
I think so, but I think it's once again, a big company botching the communication. Because the community.
Mozilla botching communication.
Yeah.
Shocked I am. Shocked I am.
Yeah, perish the thought.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's because they got to talk to their lawyers first. They got to make sure they understand that as a company, these are not people that are held accountable for the words that come out of their mouth. This is an entire corporation, and as such, there's a process that I suppose needs to happen, but that's not how it gets interpreted by the community. But because of the time it takes for a company to respond to these things, it's interpreted by the community that there's a level of just complacency going on, or just outright, nobody's paying attention to any of this, because if this was a down to earth, grassroots, open source, hippy dippy on GitHub or on GitLab project, that you would have gotten a response to this kind of thing, within an hour or two, or supposedly. But because there's a big company involved, and we always enjoy taking a little bit of a dig at Mozilla
Hmm.
because we expect a lot out of them.
Yeah.
So, but hopefully they fix this because I'm a single user, so from what I understand, the vulnerability doesn't really affect me. The things that it can do, it doesn't affect me personally, but I can see. Sometimes you read uh, security news and they talk about some of the vulnerabilities, and it's just moon speak to me. But stuff like this, I've at least got a little bit of an understanding of what Polkit and dbus is all about. And yeah, that's actually kind of some. I'm not a developer, but that sounds like some amateurish type stuff right there. But that's all the
Okay.
criticism I've got.
Well, we better move on,
Yeah.
since if we were to sit here and start cussing Mozilla, we'd be here till next week.
God, we'd never do anything else.
Yeah, no. Anyway, the EFF launches the Tor University Challenge. So, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, on their website, on Tuesday launched the Tor University Challenge, a campaign urging higher education institutions to support free anonymous speech by running a Tor network relay. Universities answering this call to defend private access to an uncensored web will receive prizes while helping millions of people around the world and providing students and faculty a vital learning experience. Journalists, political and social scientists, attorneys, business people, and other users all over the world rely on Tor for unfettered, unmonitored access to knowledge and communications. EFF senior staff technologist Cooper Quinton said, I'm not sure about that, but anyway. Anonymous speech has always been a pillar of democratic society, letting us discuss anything without fear of retribution, and facilitating this discussion can be a great educational opportunity for students and faculty alike. That I agree with. Made up of volunteer-run relays, the Tor network allows human rights defenders and organizations at at-risk communities and people experiencing online censorship or government surveillance to browse the unrestricted internet with as much privacy and anonymity as possible. A Tor relay is a computer that's part of the anonymization process. A Tor bridge is a relay that's not publicly listed in order to circumvent censorship in countries that block IP addresses of known relays. Currently, roughly 7,000 relays and 2,000 bridges help make the global network by simply donating a spare computer, bandwidth and time. Universities already volunteering for Tor relays include MIT, Georgetown University, Carnegie Mellon University, Technical University Berlin, University of Cambridge and others. University-run relays provide students with hands-on cybersecurity experience in a real environment, helping real people while stimulating discussion about global policy, law and society, particularly regarding free speech issues. It can help build community between students and faculty, as well as advance research and recruitment. Universities are ideal sites for hosting Tor relays as they tend to have good network connectivity, lots of technical expertise, okay, maybe not that bit, to run relays, including professors, students and IT teams, and generally value freedom of thought and expression. By running a Tor relay, universities can directly promote themselves as defenders of intellectual freedom and vanguards against censorship. To learn more about the Tor University Challenge, there's a link in the show notes, and more about Tor as well. There's another link there as well. This is quite cool. I quite like this. It's one of those kind of good news stories for a change.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I've heard of anybody actually starting up a Tor network. That's actually kind of cool.
Yeah.
And it's cool when you get EFF news in the regular, wider Linux news, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Reminds you that they're out there.
They exist.
They exist. And they're here for you. Moving on, OpenZFS 2.2 is nearly here. And ZFS Boot Menu 2.2 already is. And this is from the Register. The next minor version of OpenZFS is nearly ready, and ZFS Boot Menu makes it easy to boot Linux from it via a clever workaround. The advanced OpenZFS file system is getting close to its next release. Version 2.2 with release candidate 3 Around this time last year's OpenZFS 2.1 got to release candidate 8, so it might be a little while yet. Version 2.2 will improve support for Linux containers with support for overlay file systems, sometimes also called union file systems. Support for Linux 6.3 ID mapped mounts, which are explained in this talk, and delegation of dataset namespaces to containers. Block cloning should improve the efficiency of marking identical blocks as shared by different files or even parts of the same file. The new Blake 3 algorithm can be used to generate ZFS checksums, which is also used in the new CDC Valid. I know I said that wrong. P2P tool we recently covered and managed. Management of the disk cache has been improved. This is all good stuff, and it should work with Linux kernels from 2013's version 3.10 right up to 6.4 and 2020's FreeBSD 12.2 onward. ZFS remains more or less the state of the art in open source file system design. Both SUSE and Oracle remain enthusiastic about Btrfs, but Red Hat isn't. Meanwhile, the new Bcachefs still might not yet make it into kernel 6.5. The big snag with ZFS, though, is that it isn't part of the Linux kernel and won't be anytime soon. It's easy enough to add it on, but there is a user space version, ZFS Fuse, and Ubuntu, for instance, includes the modules for kernel support as standard. Canonical seems to be backing away from integrating ZFS support, though. Ubuntu's ZSys module to integrate ZFS handling into the operating system has seen little maintenance in the last couple years, and some users now recommend avoiding it. All is not lost. The teams behind the handful of Linux distros are actively working on full native ZFS support. Notably, NixOS has first-class support, and Void Linux team are working on it. Although it still requires some extra manual work at this point, the Phoronix hypervisor and container host also supports it. As with anything on Arch Linux, with some manual steps. It's also possible on Arch and its derivatives. A core issue is that Grub has only very limited support for ZFS. Sun released just enough ZFS code under GPL2 to enable Grub to boot OpenSolaris as LWN described back in 2010. Usefully, there's a totally separate cross-distro way to keep the root file system of a Linux system on ZFS and boot from it. ZFS boot menu. This supports multiple distros including Alpine, Debian, Ubuntu, Fedora, and OpenSUSE, although currently only on Leap 15.4. There are additional scripts available to help you install the distro of your choice on a ZFS pool, such as for Ubuntu Server. For it to work with most distros, the installation instructions require that your computer boots via UEFI, although installation on MBR using syslinux to boot is possible. It's documented for Void Linux. The way that ZFS boot menu works is clever. In effect, it's a tiny Linux distro which boots other distros. From its own description, ZFS boot menu is a small, self-contained Linux system that knows how to find other Linux kernels and initram FS images from ZFS file systems. When a suitable kernel and initram FS are identified, either through an automatic process or direct user selection, ZFS boot menu launches that kernel using the kexec command. This means that, like on FreeBSD, ZFS boot menu can see inside ZFS snapshots and present a menu of different bootable environments. For instance, you could roll back to an earlier version of your OS if a bad update has stopped something working. It would be great news if Canonical adopted ZFS boot menu and moved forward with ZFS support as the legal issues seem to be surmountable. But in the meantime, if you're willing to do a little well-documented manual work, thanks to the nifty little tool, it's possible to install most distros onto what Sun called the last word in file systems. Yeah. And let me be clear about something here. When people say that the support on Ubuntu is wavering a bit, they're talking about ZFS on root. And I don't think anybody does a good enough job making that clear. Having ZFS right out of the box to where you can install a system and then create storage with ZFS, that's still working just as good as it ever did. But ZFS on root, honestly, I don't know. I'm not really sure I have an opinion on that, because ButterFS seems to work for that particular purpose. It seems to work just fine. I don't know. I know there's people out there that don't agree with that, but I run several servers with, traditional ways of installing the root file system, and I use ZFS quite heavily for all of my storage volumes, and it seems to be a wise choice for that. But I don't know, on Linux, these this thing like this ZFS boot menu seems to be kind of a bolted on kind of solution to provide that functionality, and I'm not sure a company like Canonical would want to go with something.
What's the value proposition, really? What is the main benefit that you're getting with going ZFS, which
you got
the other file systems?
Okay, so it's sold as, okay, so you got a checksumming file system, you've got rollbacks, you've got a more efficient rollback system where you can create the snapshots and you can boot. Each one of these snapshots can be a separate boot environment, and the snapshots work really well, and ZFS has been around for a long time, and it's really, really well maintained.
So it sounds like it's got functionality which you can get from other places anyway.
There's some built-in distrust for ButterFS, ButterFS is probably the closest thing we've got in terms of the usable options. But see, ButterFS is right there in the Linux kernel, and I've been using it for years, even through the times where they said, "Oh, you can't use it for RAID 5 and 6." Well, those kind of workloads are obvious for something like ZFS anyway. But for like a single disk where you want to just utilize the snapshotting and the rollbacks, ButterFS is just fine for that. I never have understood. I guess every project, file systems. It's crazy that file systems is one of those things that's got kind of a fanboy atmosphere around it, but it really does.
Wait a minute. Free and open source software has fanboys?
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God! Another?
It's time you knew that, Jed.
Oh man! Another shocking piece of news from Bill.
You heard it here first, kids.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Anyway, let's move on. So Dev1 GNU and Linux 5 is here for software freedom lovers, based on Debian 12. So Dev1, for the people who don't know or care, is basically Debian without systemd. It stayed with your old init system.
So you don't get GNOME.
Yeah, anyway. So the Dev1 developers announced the release of Dev1 GNU and Linux 5 Daedalus distribution as a 100% derivative of Debian GNU/Linux operating system without systemd and related components. Just that paragraph tells you everything you need to know about the person who's writing it and the website that it's come from. Because it's just the way that it's structured. But anyway, based on the latest GNU, Debian GNU slash Linux 12, I'm not going to call it that. Based on the latest Debian 12 Bookworm operating system series, Dev1 GNU plus Linux 5 is powered by the long-term support Linux 6.1 LTS kernel series. New features in this release include the use of a libc1 library for rootless Dartex and access to input video devices, which removes the dbus dependency from the X server XOR core, and the enablement of a true Wayland desktop without elongate. Users can now enjoy a Wayland desktop without elongate by installing libpam -ck-connector, sway, and seatd, said the devs in the release notes. The devs also note the fact that libc1 can use either seatd or elongin-d as a backend, which can be set manually using the libc backend environment variable. Seatd users are reminded to ensure their user is a member of the video group. Even if it doesn't ship with the systemd in it by default, the Dev1 GNU Linux dateless installation media provides users with the choice of installing non-free firmware packages during installation if they need it for their hardware, allowing for full compatibility. I don't like this paragraph, but it's what's in the article. True software freedom lovers can avoid the loading of non-free firmware imposed by the automatic installation by choosing the expert install option in the installation menu. As I said, you can tell exactly where this guy's.
It's worth mentioning that when we do news on mintCast, a lot of the articles that we add to our news are blog posts or like announcements, and they're just full of everything from conjecture to opinion to, I mean, you can feel, like he said, the fact that they don't just call it Dev1, they got to make sure that they call it GNU plus Linux, tells you everything you need to know, that these are the people that are bought into the evangelic.
These are the Taliban of the open source community. I can say that. I'm gonna say it.
Hey, right on, brother.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like,
it's true, though. I mean...
But it is true. I mean, it's like, you're so ideological.
Yeah.
And it's like... I mean, I'm going to go off again on a tangent. Whenever I've had a discussion about systemd, and I remember the whole furore when it happened, and I remember listening to Linux Mint around that time as well, and Linux Luddites as used to be on at that time, and most people would be kind of, I don't understand what the problem is. And then the ones who did find it as a problem were like, it like shook them to their core. It wasn't just like, this is a thing that I don't like. They acted like they had been betrayed by their significant other with the neighbor in the shed. That's how they acted. It was like the worst thing in the world that had ever happened. And I just couldn't... Well, as I said, maybe it's my own lack of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
I just didn't. I could understand why you disagree with it, but this kind of visceral reaction of
it's because
systemd.
Once you allow something like that to come in, once you allow something that has tentacles into all different parts of the system, once you allow something like that, you've opened the floodgates for other black box technologies to come in and invade this beautiful open source hippy dippy thing that we've been enjoying so long. Because systemd, at the end of the day, I suppose you do have to accept the fact that it breaks the fundamental Unix philosophy of do one thing and do it well, because systemd does many things, and it feels like a bit of a black box to a lot of people.
So there's a generational thing here, I think, which is that for people who got into free and open source software much later, like myself, right? For whom free and open source is the important part of the whole project, as it were, rather than the fact that it's Unix-like, or the fact that it's a microkernel, or the fact whatever, all these things, which admittedly are, they're obviously important to the people from the beginning. But do you see what I mean? It's a generational thing,
Yeah.
right? So for me, as long as it's open source, right, that's it. It's thumbs up from me, right? I get annoyed when there's kind of proprietary stuff happening, or people are acting as if it's like a proprietary system, which is one of the problems that people are having with Canonical these days, that they've got a free and open source product but they're acting like it's their own, like Apple are, and that's pushing up people the wrong way. For me, the fact that it's the fact that it's Unix-like or whatever is, for me, it's a bit of the dim and distant past, because I wasn't involved at the time, and so I mean, so to be fair, for people for whom Linux is that kind of demonstration of how that philosophy can work in the real world, I suppose, I can understand why it would be upsetting. Because it's kind of like, that's, the whole point is this. But then it's like, has that happened? It's been what, 8-9 years now since System D. Have the floodgates opened?
Right. No. But that's never going to go away. That whole chain of fear, that system of reaction.
Well, for the 3 Dev1 GNU plus Linux 5 users out there, it's available as a download and installation, netbook and Docker images. And if you want the live ISO, it features the XFCE 4.18 desktop environment, so you really can feel happy about being against the idea of any kind of progress. Anyway, I'm starting to get more and more opinionated now, so I better...
Well, I think it's appropriate, because, I mean, this article was written with opinion in the background. Why shouldn't we read it with opinion? I'm not dead against something like Dev1. I like that things, if you don't like the direction something's going, I like the fact that we can create something, because it's open source. I like the fact that we can create something that works the way we think it should. I suppose that's a good thing. I like it better when you take your skills and you add to technologies that are modern and make it better. But the fact that this ability we have in open source exists, I will always...
Have you seen The Life of Brian?
The Life of Brian. No.
The Monty Python movie from the 80s.
Oh, that Monty Python stuff, I wasn't into it as much as some of my friends were.
So there's a whole hilarious section in there about the People's Front of Judea versus the Judean People's Front. And and it was the joke about, people being basically exactly the same but have split for some petty reason and now want to kill each other, and so it's kind of... There's just the whiff of the People's Front of Judea about this.
Get it.
Life of Brian, what a fantastic film. See, I suppose that shows because I'm British that it's just part of the lexicon here. Like you can just see, even now, if you're talking with people of a certain age, you can say comments, jokes from the film, and people will get it. He's not the Messiah. He's just a naughty boy.
That naughty boy thing is kind of lived on and used as well, all by itself.
Yeah,
just a naughty boy.
Anyway, having talked about the news, I suppose we better get on to the security and privacy news. So, from the Hacker News, new SkidMap Linux malware variant targeting vulnerable Redis servers. So vulnerable Redis services have been targeted by a new improved dangerous variant of the malware called SkidMap that's engineered to target a wide range of Linux distributions. The malicious nature of this malware is to adapt this to the system on which it is executed, Trustwave security researcher Radoslav Zanotsky said in an analysis published last week. I think that's how you pronounce the name. Some of the Linux distribution SkidMap sets its eyes on include Alibaba, Anolis, OpenEULA, EULA OS, Stream, CentOS, Red Hat, and Rocky. SkidMap was first disclosed by Trend Micro in September 2019 as a cryptocurrency mining bot Oh, what a surprise. With capabilities to load malicious kernel modules that can obfuscate its activities as well as monitor the miner process. I love that word, obfuscate. Fantastic word. I like the guy who wrote this already.
I like
The
using it around dumb people.
obfuscating, yeah.
Obfuscate. Your brain is obfuscated.
The operators of the malware have also been found camouflaging their backup command and control IP address on the Bitcoin bot blockchain, evocative of another botnet malware known as Gluptiba. The technique of fetching real-time data from a decentralized and essentially uncensorable data source to generate a C2 IP address makes the infection difficult to take down and makes pivoting the C2 IP address simple and fast, a KMI noted in February 2021. Today's attack chain, documented by Trustwave, involves breaching poorly secured Redis server instances to deploy a dropper shell script that's designed to distribute an ELF binary that masquerades as a GIF image file. The binary then proceeds to add SSH keys to the /root /authorize_keys file, disable SE Linux, establish a reverse shell that pings an actor-controlled server every 60 minutes, and ultimately download an appropriate package named Gold, Stream, or Euler based on the Linux distribution and the kernel used. Ooh, that is scary. The package, for its part, comes with several shell scripts to install the kernel modules and take steps to cover up the tracks by purging logs, and launch a botnet component capable of retrieving additional rootkit payloads, mCPU info, co to hide the miner process, and kmeminfo.co to analyze modified drop network packets. Also downloaded is the miner binary itself, although in some variants a built-in miner from an extracted GIF binary file is used. The level of advancements of this malware is really high, and detecting it, especially in larger server infrastructures, can be very hard, Zorinchik said. When testing it on home computers, the only serious indicator that something was wrong was the excessive operation of fans, and in the case of laptops, the temperature of the case. Yeah, that does seem a bit scary, actually.
Yeah, because I'm using Redis on almost everything I run, with the exception of a couple of websites, because it does improve the performance. So yeah, I'm particularly interested when I hear something like this.
Okay, and the last piece of security and privacy is about Downfall. So this is from 95 Linux. Debian 11, Bullseye, and Bookworm have been patched with updated kernel Intel microcode packages effective from August the 12th. So that was a short bit of security and privacy news there. On to the wonderings. So Moss is not here today, as you may have noticed. So it's just basically the Bill and Majid show. So William, go ahead.
Welcome, kids. Okay. So, these last 2 weeks have been a continuation of the crazy busy running I've been coming to expect this summer, and it has been busy. The kids have been back in school, however, and this has brought on more challenges than I'd like to deal with. Indiana, for those of you that might not understand how the United States works, for many things, the individual states are left to handle most of the laws that impact human beings directly. And you'll have some wildly different laws from one state to the next. Well, Indiana is a somewhat conservative state, for better or worse, and which means that most people say they care about education until it comes time to pay for it. Sadly, there is an increasing number of people who believe public schools have become nothing more than an institution for indoctrinating liberal values, which is absolutely not the case. As a result of this belief, conservative politicians have turned public education into a platform and declared war on our schools. This is my opinion and in no way reflect that of mintCast.
I can see that you're really sitting on the fence on this one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've had this. This has been a boiling topic in my life for a long time, but it's gotten bad. Our schools have been defunded to the point where they are nearly unable to function, in my opinion. One of the first things we're noticing is the transportation, meaning the buses. On average, bus drivers have to run two routes, meaning students, my middle boy, middle of my what I call my replacement kids, because I've got two grown boys from previous marriage and then three kids with my current wife, and the middle one goes to middle school, which would be um, I'm not sure what they call that in the UK, but it's grades 6, 7, and 8.
So age of about say 11 to 14, around that
Yeah,
age group.
thereabouts,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and well, these students may have to wait an hour after school to get a ride home because of the lack of necessary transportation resources. I blame this on a combination of dwindling resources and the overall driver shortage, which is a thing in this country as a whole. You have to have a commercial driver's license to drive a school bus, and you have to have a certain endorsement on that license to allow you to haul children back and forth to school. And when somebody goes through the work of getting a professional driver's license, they want a professional driving job. And the reality is jobs like what I do, driving a semi truck, a combination vehicle, um, it's probably less to deal with in terms of having to handle children, and pays exponentially more money than a school route would. Uh, s- Driving school buses have been historically, a job for a certain kind of person that just needs supplemental income in the family, and that it doesn't really make sense to try to live on that. I could be wrong, but it doesn't make sense to me because you're only really working a couple hours in the morning and a couple hours in the evening. It's hard to imagine making that into a full time career. But at any rate, the number of people willing to do it at all has gone down. Um, we see this trend repeating itself all over the country, especially in regions with conservative constituencies. Now, I use that word constituencies because it is the people that live in these places that develop the attitude towards the schools. And it's amazing to me because most of this comes from people that don't even have children in school. This idea that schools are teaching all of these things that are so contrary to
Well, I
traditional.
mean, yeah, I mean, in that scenario, then, see, just to butt in, if someone is in a area and the majority of people in that area decide that they don't want to fund the school, right, and so therefore they've got a rubbish education system, then I'm sorry, personal responsibility takes over. That is their fault, right? And it's what they wanted. So it's like, you wanted this mess, you voted for this, go ahead. I actually don't have that much of a problem with that because it's what you wanted. If you want to, you are allowed to make stupid decisions in your life. The problem I have, and I don't know if this is true in the US, it is true to an extent in the UK, where the majority of people would not have voted for a certain policy, whatever that policy might be, but all of us have to live by it. And that is what gets me. So it's like, for example, I'm in a constituency, parliamentary constituency, which has voted for a party which has wanted to invest in healthcare. The ruling party, on the other hand, does not want to invest in healthcare, and so we have a falling apart national health system, which protects murderers and castigates clinicians. I'm going to get onto that rant in a bit. So, in one sense, if this is what those people want, right, then live with it. It's what
The
you wanted. You
problem,
got what you wanted.
the problem with that though is that the people that are complaining about it are the people like me that didn't want that. The people that the people that wanted this war on public education, on education in general, in fact, because these are the same people that are screaming about critical race theory being just the ridiculous garbage, uh, and they don't want schools to be seen as being in favor of liberal things like alternative lifestyles and things like that. Those people are not the ones that have a problem here because they don't value education the way somebody like myself does to begin with. I think now though, as the whole problem with the transportation is going to start hitting, almost everybody that sends their kids to public school, I think now there's going to be some problems. There's going to be some people that have a problem with it. But before, the only thing anybody wanted to talk about was uh, liberal indoctrination, and they don't like having to pay for institutional fees. Which, by the way, it came out in the news last week that we're no longer paying institutional fees. Parents are no longer responsible for institutional fees uh, for our individual student, which takes even more money out of the schools because they were funded with a combination of state money and the institutional fees that each parent would pay, which on average is anywhere from like $100 to $300 per year per child. That's quite a bit of money taken out of the system, um, and we were already seeing some of the beginnings of the decay as a result of all that to begin with, and now it's going to be even worse. So I'm wondering that now that it's going to hit the wheelhouse of the families who don't necessarily care about education, because now you are going to make it uh, inconvenient for families that have to wait an extra hour for their kid to get home before they can go and do whatever they want to do, because these buses literally have to take one route home and then go back to the school and pick the next group of kids up, which could take anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half for that first route, and then go back to the school to get the second. And from the best of my knowledge, that school is not legally responsible for the well being of those children after school hours. So when they're on school property waiting for that bus to run the first route, they are basically on their own. And I mean, what message are we supposed to get from that? That, well, you guys need to figure out a way to get your own kids to school, because we just can't do it anymore, or what?
You
But
you
it's
reap you reap what you sow. If you're gonna act like this, then if you're gonna vote for people like this is what you'll get. And then you
that's what I
maybe, yeah. And so let them. I'm sorry, I'm not getting any sympathy.
I don't I wouldn't either, except it's my kids, and this is not, education's always been the thing that I voted for. But I live in a place where education seems to have less of an impact on the lives of normal people. You know, I, it is what it is. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Um, anyway, that's enough on that. Um, I had my every 6 month checkup with my doctor this past week, where after a blood test, it's revealed the medication I'm on for cholesterol is not working. My triglycerides as well as overall cholesterol is sky high. My A1C is also well above comfort levels. It's at 6.8. And that is iterably worse. Uh, it's gotten iterably worse over the last 5 years. I'm not sure what my doctor's going to do because my appointment was at 4 p.m. on Friday, and then I went to the lab and had that work done at 5 p.m., so she's not had a chance to react to it yet. But I'm sure I'll get a phone call Monday, tomorrow, as we record this. Um, I've got a friend who's going through a similar struggle, and his doctor prescribed Ozempic, which seems to be the modern thing that is working for most people that are struggling the same thing I am. So it's likely that my doctor will do the same thing because these are doctors on the similar healthcare network. Uh, but I wouldn't want to speculate too much on that. So the only thing I've done tech-wise this last week is to add Redis object caches to all the servers, like I was describing earlier. Um,
So, sorry, just to go back to your medical point, I would imagine Ozempic is a good drug in the sense that it will help your blood sugar. It may well cause a decrease in your cholesterol. It will also cause your weight to be decreased. It's good for weight loss. It is a little bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut, but does work. Be aware of the side effects. Your relationship with food will change. I mean that genuinely, because you won't be able to eat as much. You won't feel the need to eat, etc. Things like that. Because that's why so these celebrities take it off label as a weight loss thing, because gives you a kind of aversion to food. What I would also say is that if they offer you something simple like metformin, go for it, because there's actually some good evidence. I was speaking to a colleague the other day that even if you're not diabetic, metformin has good health benefits and it's dirt cheap. So just thought since I'm a doctor, I thought I better chime in with something about
yeah, I was
that.
hoping you would. Yeah, because I've got friends that are on metformin. Obesity and blood sugar and things is a bit of a problem in the United States.
It's a bit of a problem around the world.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, both of those drugs would help in weight loss, which would help in then your kind of your HbA1cs and your cholesterol and stuff like that. So those would be the way to go. I wouldn't necessarily start getting on the medications which actively bring your blood sugar down, because they can actually cause weight gain, which would then kind of make the underlying problem worse. You sort the symptom out of having higher blood sugar, but you haven't fixed the underlying cause, which is probably the increased adipose tissue because the weight's too high. Anyway, sorry, I better let you
I feel
get
like
on
she
with
would know that. I mean, the other problem, well, not really a problem. The other dimension to this whole thing is the fact that I hold a commercial driver's license, which means I have to be able to pass a physical, and there's standards that I have to meet as far as.
Yeah, so again, metformin and Ozempic would be good drugs for that, because they don't cause the kind of catastrophic low blood sugars that some of the other medications do. But yeah, see what she says.
Yep. Watch this space. As I was saying, the only thing I've done tech-wise this last week is to add Redis object cache servers to all the websites which I administer, including mintcast.org and the Nextcloud instance we use for our cloud storage and document collaboration. Redis is a caching server that organizes data more efficiently and runs much of its caching in memory so as to increase performance and lower latency by taking much of the workload off the database itself. Users should notice some performance benefits, such as faster page loads and such. Uh, since my sysadmin skills are self-taught, I'm learning these things as I go. I was excited to learn how to get these things up and running. I mean, it's not necessarily straightforward to add these things to a web server or a cloud server. Um, they're not even, in terms of a cloud server, it's not even completely necessary to run it. But in a case like ours where you've got multiple people using it and it's being it's got a high level of use, then it's a good idea to have it
Yeah,
running.
I mean, Nextcloud and clouds are the kind of theme of the day, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, because that's pretty much what I'm going to start off with when it comes to my wanderings. I've been exploring the cloud and networks during these past 2 weeks, and in part, it has led us to it led us to deciding that the innards would be about networking and Nextcloud and cloud services. So, like a lot of people, I've got a variety of cloud services that I use. This started off really as document and photo backup, where whatever's on my machine, I'd back up to the clouds as well as backing up to a physical hard drive. However, as time has gone on and I've progressed in my career, I found that having constant access to my files was really useful, to the extent that I'm not sure I could work or even play really without these conveniences. You know, being at work and somebody is saying, "Oh, have you got this guideline?" and it's like, "Yeah, here we are. I've got it straight away." And having that over all my devices. It's, as I said, it's one of these things that once you get used to, it's difficult to go back in a sense. Now, I do try and compartmentalize things because I do think work-life balance is very important. I'm not saying that I've got it down, but I try. So I've got this grandfather's OneDrive account, which I had it when it was SkyDrive. So I've got like 25 gigs on that. So I use that for photo backup. I also have a Google Drive. I use that for mainly my Islamic books and things like that. I had some promotional offers on Google Drive. So although they only give you 15 gig, it would regularly go up to 100 gig for a while because I bought a Chromebook, for example, or I bought a Pixel. And then, so I kind of managed with that. Photo backup didn't used to use your allowance, but now it has, and that's annoyed me. Because now, or any promotional offers that I did have are all gone now, and I'm down to the standard 15 gig. And it was the first time that I thought about Nextcloud and whether to have my own cloud. Looked a little bit into it, looked a bit complicated, so I thought maybe not right now. I also found that there was I don't want to say a free way, but a very cost-effective way of getting Google Drive without actually paying any money. And that is if you do Google Opinion Rewards, where they send you these little surveys that you get 10 cents for, 20 cents for. After a while, that starts to accumulate and you get, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 bucks. And so I thought, well, I could get Google Drive and have it taken out of that, the rewards thing. So I'm not actually paying, if you know what I mean. Anyway, so for when it came to work, I started off with Dropbox, and Dropbox was brilliant because it had a Linux client. It had a very good Linux client. It worked on everything. It had Office integration. It was fantastic. And even though nowadays, if you want a free account, you only get 2 gig. Back in those days, I'd got an old plan, which I had 10 gig free. But then they put a 3-device limit on their free plan. And even if I was just using it for work, it still was too limiting for me. And so I was out. I ended up on Mega, which is the successor to Mega Upload, which was one of the original copyright infringing websites. And the way that they relaunched themselves was that they enacted zero-knowledge encryption, so that nobody could see their files, nobody could see your files, not even they could. You had to have the decryption key, right? They gave a generous amount of free storage, which was 50 gig for the first year, going down to 20. And I thought, well, let me use this for the time being while I figure out what to do. That was back about in 2015, something like that. So I've been using it regularly now since then, and part of that is because the apps it has works fantastically on all the OSs I've used it on, whether it's Linux, Android, Windows, even iOS and Mac OS. Surprisingly, they work really well. there have been some concerns about privacy, and the fact is that I am hitting the 20 gig limit now, meant that I started looking elsewhere. Now, I just want to say a little bit about the so-called privacy concerns. So I've been looking into this, and independent organizations or websites or whatever who have looked into Mega don't seem to think that there is actually much of a problem. It's open source software. All the that even the clients and whatever, all of that stuff is up on GitHub. It is zero knowledge. You're the one with the encryption key. The concerns that were raised by the former CEO after he left. So there's the whiff of, he's been forced out and now he's annoyed, and so he wants to complain about the product. And he made these allegations back in 2015, and yet things still haven't been substantiated. It is true that there's a lot of ownership by Chinese companies, and also the New Zealand government has a stake, but there's been no suggestion at any point that there's been any significant data breach. And even when there has been any kind of loss of data, it's the metadata is the only thing that's been found, because, as I said, zero knowledge encryption. Anyway, we were having this discussion on one of the live streams, and so Nextcloud was again suggested to me. I read a bit about it. I didn't feel confident with the setup. So I started exploring others. I mean, you could argue that I could just pay for one of the big ones. The thing is that Dropbox is actually quite expensive for what they offer. Drive and OneDrive, as in Google Drive and OneDrive, don't play well with Linux. I know there's the GNOME account integration, but as a general rule, there's no official client, right? More importantly, none of these are zero knowledge or encrypted. And so I had a look at Nextcloud again, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that in the innards. While I was looking around the internet, I looked at a lot of the other services that are around. So I looked at Proton Drive. So Proton Drive, from the people that make Proton Mail, based in Switzerland. They don't give you a lot for free, but it's a good player in the open source space. Surprisingly, though, does not have a Linux client. You have to use the web version, so that put that one out. pCloud is another one which you find, again, zero knowledge encryption. Well, sort of. If you take the free account, you don't have that. You have to get the additional add-on called pCloud Crypto, which doesn't have anything to do with cryptocurrencies, but enables that zero knowledge encryption. And there's issues around the speed of it. iDrive, very similar. If I remember, iDrive didn't have a Linux client. Sync is another one. Now, Sync had some problems with speeds and transfer speeds because of the fact, I think it's based in North America, and so if you're in Europe, you don't seem to get the best speeds. Internext. So Internext is a British company who, there's a slight bit of false advertising here. They advertise 10 gig free. You go on the website, you sign up, and then basically it's 2 gig with, or if you you do these little tasks, you get the 10 gig. The tasks involve getting 5 other people to sign up with them. So I never got that free 10 gig. But it did have clients for everything, and it did have zero knowledge encryption. It seemed to there were good reviews that are out there, but I thought maybe not. iStrive is another British solution. It's actually Welsh, actually. They give you 10 gig free straight away. It's again end-to-end encrypted. There are clients for everything, but the clients for Mac and Linux are basically just the web app. which is a little bit suboptimal, especially when you see that the integration it's got with Windows. It basically mounts itself as a drive and becomes the iDrive on your computer, which is a fantastic thing in the way that GNOME accounts deals with Google Drive on GNOME. So the fact that for like most of my devices it works a little bit suboptimally, and then for one laptop it works fantastic, did make me think maybe I should stick with them. But in the end, I went with Phylon. So Phylon.io, it's a German company. It is again end-to-end encrypted. You get again. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention iStrive. Again, slightly false advertising. It is end-to-end encrypted, only on the paid plans, not on the free plan, which wasn't obvious when I got it. I only figured that out later. So yeah, sorry. So Phylon.io, German. Got good speeds. The reviews have that it's got some of the best speeds on the market, especially since I'm in Europe as well. 10 gig, as I said, zero knowledge. It's got apps for everything. The synchronization is a little bit, took a while for everything to get set up. The reason that I did go for it was because when I looked into it, if I did decide to go for it full on, full time, and decide to pay, it was quite competitive. I think it was $2 a month for 200 gig, $5 a month for 500 gig. So it was it seemed to be that if it is something that I like, it is something that I could then take forward as a more permanent solution. Let's see how it goes. Watch this space. So life outside tech has been the usual, busy with work, strikes are happening, doing quite a lot of teaching for the new set of doctors that we've had. As I'd mentioned last time, I'd been doing a bit of moonlighting. So my interview on the Scholar and Student podcast is now live on YouTube. It's a little bit religion heavy, to be honest. We did talk a lot about theology and stuff, but there's a lot of, in the second half of it, there's a lot about heavy metal and gaming. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, hit it up. I feel like as a medical professional, I have to have a little bit of a rant about the Lucy Letby murders in the UK. For people who don't know about this, Lucy Letby was a paediatric nurse working in a special care baby unit in the north of England, and she was arrested in 2018 on suspicion of murdering babies in her care between the years of 2015 and 2016. She would have still only been in her early 20s at the time. She's only 33 now. Obviously this is shocking, the idea that a nurse can do these things to her patients, that to the most vulnerable of vulnerable patients, premature babies who are already fighting for their lives, as it were. But what really got me, as someone who has worked in the NHS for now coming on to 20 years, was that how negligent the hospital management were. So for people who don't know the story, after a couple of deaths that all seem to coincidentally happen. So a special care baby unit might expect 2 deaths a year. This place was getting 2 deaths a month. And it was straight after she started, and she was the common thread that whenever a baby died on the unit, she was working that shift. And the doctors that were there brought this up. They mentioned it to the hospital management. I don't think they literally thought she was killing babies. I think they thought that she was incompetent and that she was delivering bad care, and that's how these babies were dying. And hospital management basically took her side, saying that she was being bullied and harassed by these doctors, and made the doctors apologize to her for questioning her practice, and kept her on for another 18 months, in which she then murdered another 7 babies. And I'm sorry, but I think privilege played a part. If she had been a man or a person of color, action would have been taken much earlier. to the extent that I think that the management should be done for corporate manslaughter. Now, I did think to myself, maybe I'm just getting het up because of my own personal biases, but actually, yesterday the head of the Royal College of Nursing said the same statement to the press, that the fact that she was a white woman meant that she was given all sorts of excuses, and people just treated her with kid gloves, thinking that she was that this was just a bad coincidence that all these things were happening. And also now the families of the victims have been asking for inquiries for the government to do these people under corporate manslaughter, which I think so. They should. And the reason I'm having a rant about this is because I am so angry that I have seen very good clinicians who have been punished for much less, for people who are being whistleblowers, people going the extra mile, while a literal murderer, the worst child killer in recent UK history, was treated as a victim. And as I said, I'm sorry, but if she had been a person of colour, if she had been a man, she would have been taken off duty straight away rather than work for another year. And then when she was finally moved, she was moved into an admin role. And it took, as I said, almost 2 years from when the first death happened for the police to be called. And the police took 10 minutes to say, we need to investigate this. And as I said, she's been found, and I even looked into the way that she's supposed to have killed these children. It was like bloody Murder 101. It was like something you'd read off the internet. It was like, this should have been barn door obvious to anybody that this shouldn't have happened. Why should a kid who's not diabetic suddenly have low blood sugar and happen to have insulin in their system? It's like, it's something you could read up on how to kill. It's just, I'm just so angry about it. As I said, it's bad enough that there's evil people in the world, but it's even worse when we have incompetent people enabling them.
You think we still live in a time where we are still so caught up on the appearance of things, or we're caught up on this image of the type of person that would do something like that? And if it doesn't match up with the person that is accused of doing it, then it can't be true.
Oh, 100%. 100%. There is nothing. She had absolutely no red flags. She had no history of mental illness. She had no history of abuse. She had no history of, say, drug problems. She was from a well-to-do family. She was reasonably good looking. She was the definition of a nice nurse.
And it feels like we hear these things, and every time you hear this story about somebody that's done these terrible crimes, one of the first things you hear is, oh, well, they were just the nicest person. You would never know. They looked like the guy next door or the girl next door. She.
So this girl, she even wrote cards to the parents of the kids that she's killed, expressing sorry. Not the sorrow, oh, so sorry for your loss. If you need anything, let me know. And she's killed the kid.
I wonder if she thought that this was some sort of mercy killing or something, or if
I don't know what she thought. There are lots of theories. One of the ones which I think probably has got the most credence is the God complex. The idea that I have the life and death of this child in my hands. Yeah, and it's, as I said, it's or either that or it's about being the center of attention. Because there was a lot of stuff about people who obviously didn't know, but would be like, oh my God, I heard that you had a death on your shift. Are you okay? Are you all right? Do you know what I mean?
Oh my.
So who knows, right? And she is actually exhibiting the classic behavior, but she still maintains her innocence. She says she's got nothing to do with it. She refused to come to the court from the jail to hear the verdict. Now, again, that was a privileged thing. I'm sorry, but I'll bet you if it'd been somebody like me, and I said, oh, I'm not going up to the court to hear the sentence, I'd get a policeman smacking me around the head and making me go upstairs. Right? But this, no. I'm sorry, I don't want to see the judge.
Well done.
I'm sorry. It's, and as I said, first I thought it was just me, and now I realize that it's going. Lots of people are saying that had she not been a white woman, things would have happened. They made the doctors literally apologize to her for even suggesting she had anything to do with the deaths.
And you want to believe that the people that did that have some real egg on their face, but it doesn't seem like the right people are ever held accountable.
Well, as I said, corporate manslaughter.
Yeah.
Corporate manslaughter. They enabled a woman to work after because look, I'm involved in hospital management, right? I'm involved in hospital management. I'm involved with education. I know how people think, and I know, for example, that we have a doctor who has been accused of a crime, a minor crime, some misdemeanor, but because we have to take things, and it's quite likely that he'll not. It's not something. It's nothing related. Nothing like this. It's like something to do with. I think it's a driving offence. But there's been discussions as to, well, should we keep him on duty and things like this, how will it look and blah, blah, blah. Do you see what I mean? So I do understand. But it's kind of like you've got a guy who may have a driving offence and you're thinking it might be best to keep him out of the ward. But another place allowed a literal murderer to work. As I said, corporate manslaughter. Anyway, I've ranted on for too long. We've gone on for an hour and 45 minutes and we haven't even got to the innards. So let's. I will take some deep breaths, and we will get on to the Linux innards.
Yeah, as we kind of alluded to earlier, we're going to be talking somewhat about cloud storage, and we've already kind of got into some of the commercial offerings that are out there. Some are way better than others. I'm still a fan of Mega Drive. It's just the best deal out there.
It just works.
Yeah, the clients are fantastic. So,
clients are fantastic. It does have some issues. I'm not going to deny it has some issues. For example, it has a daily transfer limit. And its paid plans aren't great. I've heard the customer service isn't great either. But as I said, for something that I started off using as a temporary thing back in 2015, the fact is that it's the one app or one service which works great on everything. And I've not had to pay a single dime for it, And as I said, when I did properly research into it, the actual things, it's like that System D thing, right? Oh, System D, black box, all sorts of things can happen. Okay, have they? No, they haven't. All right. Do you think you might be over-egging it slightly? So it's a bit like that. It's like, oh, there's all these things, but they've all come from a disgruntled CEO who left the company and is now been declared bankrupt. Methinks there might be something more to that.
That, and anytime you use the word China, you get a negative connotation, I guess, built in.
Yeah, I mean, there was an interesting video that I watched which said that even if it's completely infiltrated by the Chinese Communist Party, it is zero encryption, right? So what are they going to get out of it? Unless they're literally lying to you and they've got the encryption keys themselves, copies of them. But then all of it's up on GitHub. So...
And if you're that worried about it, encrypt it yourself before you upload it.
Exactly. Exactly. And actually, just as a little advanced thing, that's one of the things that we're going to be saying about checking out. There are a couple of services in which you can still use normal. You can still use the major players like Google Drive, Microsoft OneDrive, Dropbox, whatever. But with tools like Cryptomator, you can encrypt it yourself, and then it gets stored up there, and when it comes back down. But anyway, we're kind of jumping the gun a little bit. So, as I said, while I was doing this investigation into cloud services, and there is a little bit of the kind of idealist in me of thinking, why should I have my data on someone else's server? What happens if the server goes down? Why should I pay somebody for stuff which I shouldn't need to pay for? And I surely, as somebody who has who is a self-identified geek, even if he's a little bit of a noob, surely I should be able to sort out my own solution. And so I'd looked into Nextcloud a couple of times, and my use of using Nextcloud for mintCast, and the kind of collaborative tools that we've got, I've been very impressed, because it is very much a suite. It's very much, so Mega isn't a suite, right? It is documents and photos and maybe a bit of chats. That's about it. Proton Drive, on the other hand, is very much a suite. Skiff is another service which is very much a suite with collaborative tools and things like that. And Nextcloud has that. And, how much more safe can you have it if it's on your own server? It's on your own computer. And it's open source. Why not? I've got a Raspberry Pi. It's sat here at the moment doing not a lot. It seems to be a perfect thing to do. Bill keeps telling me about how he's got a Nextcloud. He runs our mintCast Nextcloud off a Raspberry Pi in his.
Well, no. It's running on a big machine back behind me over here. But it is just as possible. The reason I'm running it on the big machine is because it needs to be able to handle collaboration all over the world. But as far as one person connecting to it, a Raspberry Pi would fill that purpose perfectly well.
So when I started looking into this, and I found a couple of guides, and there was two ways of doing it. It seemed first was to just put Nextcloud onto a normal distro. Actually, no. Let me rephrase that. There was three ways of doing it. Just putting Nextcloud onto a standard distro. Putting Nextcloud onto a server distro, so installing the snap of Nextcloud, say, on Ubuntu server. Or the method which I went for, which is the Nextcloud Pi solution, which is, as far as I understand, a kind of Docker all-in-one image. Yeah, go ahead. Is that a fair thing to say? That's what it was?
Well, let's see. You do have the Docker all-in-one image, which you can put that basically on top of any Linux distribution that's running Docker. Let me take a look here. I have not looked at Nextcloud Pi in some time now. Basically, what you've got with Nextcloud Pi is a purpose-built distribution. No matter what technology they're using, whether it's installed on bare metal or if it's a Nextcloud Docker image or what have you, it's already installed and ready to go. In fact, if you started up Nextcloud Pi and then you opened a browser and you typed in the IP address of that Pi, then it would take you to the Nextcloud setup screen.
Which is exactly what it did. So I did that. So what I did first was, I've got a Raspberry Pi 400. I got a 256 gig micro SD card, because I thought I had heard something about that there might be issues if you've got a separate attached storage. So I just thought, let's just have one big card in there, and then I can just use the entire thing. I then flashed the image onto the SD card. I logged in, and then managed to get the web GUI to work. Did have a slight problem where I managed to lose some passwords, and so I had to do a reinstall again. I then was able to configure SSH so that I could SSH into it. SSH seems fantastic. What a fantastic tool, man. Fantastic. And then I hit my first roadblock. So I now have Nextcloud on an IP address on this Raspberry Pi. I can get to it from my home network, but it keeps coming up saying this is not safe and I need a certificate. So I thought, okay, and maybe I need to get an SSL certificate or something like that. So I found Let's Encrypt. Let's Encrypt, you can Snap install certbot, which will give you a certificate. But it then said that I couldn't use that because I just had an IP address. I didn't have an actual website. So what did I do wrong there?
All right. So what Nextcloud? So first off, to back up a little bit, Nextcloud Pi is not a distribution. It is basically one of those shell scripts that you curl in and pipe into Bash, just like when you're installing Pi-hole or something like that, or Nextcloud Pi or whatever. But when it's done, it does all of the work of setting up Nextcloud for you. Okay, so moving on. Now you've got a machine with Nextcloud installed on it, and I presume one of the steps of Nextcloud Pi is to set up a static IP address, internal IP address, for the device that Nextcloud is installed on, because that's necessary. It complains because there's no, without the use of encryption, there's no TLS, there's no encryption between devices, and it wants that. Now, you can ignore that and just use it on your local IP, but if you're going to go outside of your home, you're going to need, I don't even think Nextcloud will work without encryption.
Yeah,
But without
so
a domain name, you're not going to be able to get certbot to work, because Let's Encrypt needs an actual domain name on the internet to resolve to your home network, which will then resolve to the device that Let's Encrypt needs to put the certificate on. Okay.
So how would I get a domain name then?
Okay, so there's two possible ways of doing this. If you want a proper domain name, you would go and buy one from, like, I don't know, Namecheap or Squarespace or whatever, and use their dynamic DNS server or service, and there's instructions on those websites. Or the option that I am fond of is a project, an open source project called DuckDNS.
Mm-hmm.
And what DuckDNS does is gives you a dynamic IP, or what it does is they give you an A record, which is something.duckdns.org, and what that does is it gives you a domain name. Now, you also need dynamic DNS, because here's the way the internet works. Every device that's connected to the internet, and most devices in the world, are connected with IP version 4, which means you've got this 3-part number of something like 170.84.something, and that is the IP address that any server would need to resolve to know exactly where you are at. DNS is literally the phone book of the internet. DNS is the service that says, okay, this person wants majid.duckdns.net, which actually resolves to such and such IP address. Here's the thing about these IP addresses, because when you're working with a system of 3 numbers, that provides a finite number of addressable namespaces to work with. It's a huge number, but it's not infinite, which means you have to create a system where if a computer comes online or a router comes online and it needs an IP address, it gets an IP address, but then if it gets shut off and left off for months on end, it doesn't need to hold on to that same IP address, which keeps it from being used by other machines. So it's freed up for another machine to use. That's dynamic DNS, or dynamic IP. So the next time that router comes online, it will be given a different IP address. Why is that important? Well, for most people that only do stuff where they get on their computer and they play games or they get on the internet, that is outbound traffic, and it doesn't matter what your IP address is because no services are trying to connect back to you. So dynamic IP or DHCP works great. The problem is when you yourself want to start hosting a website or a cloud server, you have to have an IP address that is searchable, that is indexable or findable by the outside internet. Now, there's two ways of dealing with that. You can either pay your ISP for a proper static IP address that never changes, or you can use a service that will update your IP address at regular intervals with the DNS server that you've signed on with, in this case, DuckDNS. So you go to duckdns.org, I think is what it is.
Yeah, duckdns.org.
Okay, so
And then you can get this thing that says Linux cron.
yep. And what you'll end up with, and you follow the instructions, it tells you to set up this really, really simple shell script that sits in your home directory, and then set up a cron job. This is after you get your account and you get your little domain name with them, and you get 5 of them for free. I mean, it's great.
I mean, what do you do for when it says domain and token? What's all that about?
Okay, so the token is what you'll add the domain name and the token to the shell script, and then the cron job will execute that shell script. And what that shell script says is, "Hey, DuckDNS, we're just checking in." You know, and in most cases, your IP address won't change. If you're the kind of person that leaves your router on all the time, your IP address won't change anyway. But in the event that it does, you will need to let DuckDNS know what that new IP address is. That way, when you try to get back into your home network through that domain name, DuckDNS will know exactly what IP address to route that traffic to. Is that making sense at all?
Okay. Yeah, kind of. But I'm when I look at this at the minute, I can't see anywhere where you'd put the IP address.
Okay, so the IP address, it will find that on its own. It'll run a shell script, and it sends out to DuckDNS, and then DuckDNS sees where that shell script is being executed from, and then updates. Because you wouldn't want to write the IP address in the shell script because it might change.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing that you're updating with DuckDNS is the IP address. You're letting them know that hey, it might have changed, it might not have, or it might have, but you have to run that shell script maybe like every 15 minutes just to make sure. But when you do that, then it doesn't matter if your IP address changes or not. Periodically, DuckDNS will update your DNS record, and you will have an addressable, a routable domain name to send traffic to. You do that. Now, you have to, here's the other thing you have to do, is you have to open up ports 80 and 443, and you have to send that. You have to route 80 and 443 to the internal IP address of the device that Nextcloud is installed on, okay? And you do that through the firmware or the control panel of your router, these routers call it all different kinds of things. Like my router calls it, this router here calls it virtual servers, which is kind of a crazy way to describe it, but it's a TP link. They've all got their little corporate language to describe it, but it's port forwarding 80 and 443 back to the device that the Nextcloud is installed on. Once you've done that, then you can SSH back into that device that is running the Nextcloud, and then you can run certbot with the with the necessary domain name, and it will issue the certificate for that particular server. But none of that will work until you have the ports forwarded to that device, and you have an addressable, resolvable domain name that will come back into your home network. What are your questions?
Okay. So I've heard another way to do this is to use something like Tailscale. What does that mean?
So Tailscale is I don't know a heck of a lot about it, but Tailscale is a way of putting stuff on making stuff addressable on the internet without using port forwarding. It's basically just using a VPN type technology to get back into your home network, and basically makes all of the devices that are connected to this Tailscale. It's like a mesh VPN. A mesh VPN meaning that you've got all these devices connected all over, no matter where they're at. They're still addressable by the internal network of your home. But the same thing can be achieved by simply setting up your own WireGuard server on that same device. You're still going to need dynamic DNS though, because you still need that addressable IP address, that addressable domain name that will always resolve back to your home. But the advantage of Tailscale is that it works without poking any holes in your firewall with the port forwarding and all that. I've not tried it. The people that use it seem to love it.
Because Tailscales is apparently built on top of WireGuard.
Yeah.
So
it just works. It's a little bit less configuring involved. It's a little bit more zero conf than setting up your own WireGuard instance and then just connecting back, because you could achieve the same thing. Now you'll have to poke a hole in your firewall for the WireGuard port, which I can't remember offhand what it is, but there's instructions out there on how to do that. But once you're connected with WireGuard back to your home network, you're essentially just another device sitting on your home network. So that is another method for making that device available for the Nextcloud. Now doing that would negate the need for the domain name, because you're just basically another device sitting on the home network. You wouldn't need a domain name because you're, as far as the devices on the internal network are concerned, you're just another device sitting there on the home network. So you would connect to the Nextcloud via the internal IP address of the device that the Nextcloud is installed on.
So that means that even if I'm outside, I just put the
WireGuard client running on your phone or what have you will connect you back to the home network.
Okay.
But you need the domain to now that I think about it, you need the domain. That way, WireGuard's got an IP address, because you need the IP address or the domain name to not change. If you had a static IP address, it could use that, but since you don't, you'll need the DuckDNS IP. That way, WireGuard's got a thing to connect to that doesn't change. In this case, the domain name won't change. The IP address behind the domain name might, but that doesn't matter because dynamic DNS is always updating that IP address. I feel like I'm making this sound more complicated than it needs to be, but there is some learning involved.
So, okay. Why should I do all this? Why not just go for like I was do, but go with one of those cloud providers? Like I said, what is the main benefit I'm going to get from doing this?
I think I think for most people, if you set up a Nextcloud and you just sync to it when you're connected to your own network, if you're home every day and you sync to it from your own network, that is plenty good enough. It'll upload all the pictures that you took. Just connect your client to it via the internal IP address. Um, just don't delete anything. If you need to be able to upload to something that you have control of, um, but yet it's not necessary that you are able to access that from outside the home, then you really don't need to mess around with any of this other stuff. But if you feel the need to be in control of the entire data stack, then learning this stuff is. I thought it was kind of fun, and I kind of enjoyed learning how to do this because this skill is also transferable when you decide to make a website or something, because these are some of the same steps you would take to set up like a WordPress blog on a machine or something like that, or any WordPress based website, or any type of website for that matter. It's all the same sort of concept. So the learning is interesting, and if you feel the need to be in control of all of your own data, then there you go. That's your option. But there is some learning involved.
And so once it's set up, how would I say if I wanted to add more storage? How would I do that?
Okay, so when you set up Nextcloud, it uh, depending on what method you use to set it up, you'll be asked, and there's ways to change where the data directory of the Nextcloud is, because a place where like the working files that the software uses, that all sits in one place, and then you can actually tell Nextcloud, okay, I want all of my files to be stored over here. You've got add-ons and plugins if you want to use external storages, like if you had it on a Raspberry Pi and you wanted to hook up like a external USB drive to it. There's a plugin that you can install that just gives it instant access to external storages, and then you can use that if you wanted to. Because when you set up the Nextcloud client for your phone, you can use the default settings where it creates a file called instant upload or something like that, and it automatically uploads everything from your phone to that folder. Or you can tell the client, no, I want it put over here on this drive and this folder, and it'll do all that for you. So what's the advantage? The advantage is you are in complete control of everything from top to bottom. In the case of something like Google's got a way of ripping the rug out from under people with some of these things. For me, it was a story that came out, I guess it's been about a year ago now, where a father was using Google Drive and he was uploading his photos from his phone to it, and there was a photo that he had taken of his infant son to be used in a telemedical conversation with his doctor, and Google flagged this photo as being child pornography because it was a photo of a rash, and this guy lost his entire Google account because of it, including his Gmail that he had been using for years, all of his family photos. I mean, the reality is, once you upload your stuff to any of these cloud providers, you really don't own it anymore. Um, it's maybe not necessarily an issue if you just got some stuff and it stays on the device that you uploaded it with. But if you lose that device, you are kind of at the mercy of the company that you trusted with all of your data. So I mean, it's up to the individual as to how much this actually means to you, or how vulnerable you might be if a service just suddenly went away. Um,
I mean, this is my rationale for having zero knowledge encryption, because nobody can then see what files I've got.
yeah.
What about you get people, for example, who install Nextcloud on their own, like Linode server? Uh, how exactly is that different to
Well,
what's been done here?
you're kind of riding you're kind of riding on that line where, yeah, you're in control of the whole stack, but that stack that you're in control of is sitting on somebody else's computer, basically. So I mean, yeah, you set it up, you've got access to it, you're in more control of it, but arguably at the end of the day, that is still sitting on a device that is not completely controlled by you. Now, that's not a criticism of Linode or DigitalOcean or any of those companies, directly. That is just, I mean, that is just the reality that as good of a product as Linode is, it is still somebody else's computer, and there is a realistic expectation that has to be had of that. It Did they have a good reputation? Yes. But is that enough for it to be reliable for your data? Well, that's up to the individual. I would say you've got more uh, control of your data than, say, if you was just uploading it to a service like Google Drive, and especially if you're not paying for it. If you're not a paying customer, then you're just somebody that's using a product that is put out there into the world just to get word of mouth, or to cash in on your data, which Google absolutely does. If you've got photos on Google and Google needs a photo of something for their Google Maps or something like that, then they will absolutely use a portion of your photo. I've seen it happen, actually, where a group of friends were taking a picture outside of a Pizza Hut, and Google Maps needed a picture for that Pizza Hut, picture of that Pizza Hut for their Maps app, and they cut the portion off that had the people in it, and then kept the part that had the picture of the sign and the building and some of the general background. So, I mean, once it's up on their servers, you don't own it anymore. I suppose having your Nextcloud on a Linode is better than that, but it's still somebody else's computer. So, learning this stuff is it feels like a whole new world of computing at first, and then once these things once they start to click in your mind, then it all kind of makes sense, and you kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense, and now you know how to do this thing, and it's kind of fun too. I didn't know any of this stuff when I started setting up all this infrastructure for mintCast and that. I just kind of felt like I needed to, so I pointed my mind at it and figured it out, and now I'm almost good enough at it to explain it to somebody. Maybe not quite, but there you go.
No, that's been very interesting. Giving me some more things that I need to do and learn, and I suppose there's other things that you learn along the
Yeah.
way, like what exactly is a a shell script, for example, what exactly is a cron job? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
There's
right.
other things that you learn in this kind of how do I put it?
In the
Yeah, you know,
process of learning this
in this
thing,
process, yeah, in the process, yeah.
you might not have had another case where you needed to learn how to make a shell script, or which a shell script, since we mentioned it, is just basically a recipe of commands that are executed, you know, to you could say a shell script is software. That's one of those things that's debated, but it's just basically a list of commands that are executed to achieve some kind of goal. And in this case, it would be a shell script that would send information off to a DNS server to update your external IP address. That way, the domain name that you set up on DuckDNS, and DuckDNS is not the only service out there that provides dynamic DNS. It's the one that I know is free to use, and it's open source, and it's GitHub, and Linux, and happy joy hippie type, and which means it's kind of silly to pay, because there's another service out there called No IP, which does the same thing, except I used it years ago before I had a static IP address, and that was mostly because it was built into the Linksys router that I had at the time, because that's the thing about some of these dynamic DNS services. They're built into the router, so you don't even have to run the shell script on your own machine. The router will basically do that for you. It updates the dynamic DNS because it's built right in. But fundamentally, you're not doing anything. In fact, you're putting more work on a router, and routers are typically not the most powerful devices. Really, all you need is a device that is always on, that is always connected to the internet, to be able to run this shell script, and all it's doing is sending some information, the domain name and the token that you get from DuckDNS off to DuckDNS, so that they can see whether or not your IP address changed, and if it did, then they'll update where you are and where to route the domain name that you set up to. And then after that, it's just a matter of making sure that you route 443 and 80 to your device that your Nextcloud is installed on. Once you've got those two things achieved, then it's just a matter of running certbot to certbot goes and signs you up for your Let's Encrypt certificate, and then downloads that certificate and puts the certificate file and all the other information it needs right there on the server. And then I think it writes a cron job to automatically update that certificate as often as it needs to. So then once that command is run, you literally don't have to think about your SSL anymore. That's the beauty of certbot. There was a time you had to pay for SSL certificates. You had to
Yeah, I was
go.
going to say, I vaguely remember that from somewhere.
Yeah, and it wasn't as simple as just running a command and then it just installs it for you. You had to actually write these certificates to the necessary directories that they go in, and then you had to add it to the virtual server file that is relevant to whatever server you're running. It used to be a much more involved process. And I'm not even sure how long dynamic DNS has been around. But I can imagine there was a time where you had to have a static IP address. Which, in my case, static IP address comes along with a business fiber account, which costs an extra $13 a month, which to me was worth it because I needed to be able to. I needed to know that traffic was going to be routed reliably every second of every minute of every hour. Because of these websites that people are accessing from all over the world. Um, and plus, if you've got one of these accounts and you call up customer service, you always get somebody answering the phone, which is worth the extra $13 if you ask me. So I went that route. But for most people that are just setting something up for themselves or their own family, dynamic DNS works just fine. Especially if you run that shell script about once every 15 minutes. You set that cron job up for every 15 minutes, there's really no way. The worst thing that could happen is you restart a router and somehow you lose the IP address you had and you get a new IP address. The router comes back online and you got about a 10-15 minute wait before your shell script is executed to update that DNS again, and you got a few minutes where you can't access your Nextcloud from outside of the outside the home. That's the worst case scenario. So if that happens, if you have a situation, I don't know what the use case would be, but if that happened more than once, then I would set that cron job up to run every 5 minutes then. Because it is a simple command after all. It's just curling something out on the internet.
Well, here's something interesting if anybody is interested to know, which is that if you did want to go for Tailscale, because it's technically an enterprise solution thing, you have to sign in with a trusted provider, and those trusted providers include Google, Apple, Microsoft. So
there's no GitHub sign in?
There is a GitHub signing. I do lie. There is a GitHub signing. There is that as well. So, but yeah, just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of one of those technologies that kind of do a lot of the technical work for you. But people like it because you don't have to poke holes in your firewall. You don't have to sort out 80 and 443 yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the selling point for the people I know that use it. I mean, it's a different way of going about it, and again, it's good for your, if it's you and your family. I've never actually tried it because I've never had a use for it, but that is another way of going about it. I might do if folks, if you want to see a tutorial on this stuff, write in the show, mintcast at mintcast.org, or get a hold of us some other way. We're on Discord, whatever. Let us know, and perhaps I will make a video tutorial on setting up a Nextcloud from start to finish with the port forwarding and the duck DNS and all that.
That would be absolutely brilliant, actually.
We could do
that. We could do that as a kind of collaborative video, innit?
Yeah.
You telling me what to do and I doing it, or something like that.
Yeah, that actually sounds kind of fun. So.
Yeah. That might be a good laugh, actually. So yes, if anybody has any, if anybody else wants to see, me and.
Or if you've got some special use cases that you want to add into the whole mix, I would enjoy trying some of these things like Tailscale, which I've never tried, and see about getting it up and running, and then maybe this would all take quite a considerable amount of time, but it would be worthwhile to know what we're on about,
So, dear listener, if that's something you want to see, let us know. And even if you don't want to see it, we might do it anyway because it sounds like a laugh.
Yeah, it does. We might get a few beers together and work it out.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. So that's us for the innards. On to vibrations from the ether. There aren't any. At least not that either of us have received. So we will move on from there to check this out. So what I've put in check this out is as I was doing all this cloud D stuff, there are tools available, such as Cryptomator, which is one of the ones which I've mentioned in which I put a link in the show notes, which will encrypt your files and then allow you to then upload them to whichever service which doesn't have encryption, such as OneDrive, Google Drive, or whatever that you have. And so that, if all of this stuff is a bit too complicated for you, you've got loads of files, you're maybe already paying, but you don't like the idea that they can see your stuff. But this is a way of trying to obviate that. Other things to check out I assume this was you, Bill, who put this in, that on August 12th, 1981, IBM introduces the personal computer.
No, it wasn't me, but let's see what this is about. This has got either Moss or London written all over it.
Yeah, that's very true. So IBM introduced its PC known as the IBM Model 5150, lending legitimacy to microprocessor-based computers. IBM's first PC ran with a massive 4.77 megahertz. That's megahertz. Intel 8088 microprocessor and used Microsoft's cutting-edge MS-DOS operating system, which was actually branded as PC-DOS. And there's some more information around that momentous day in history in the show notes. There's also a useful link to the Computer History Museum if you want to know more about the history of early computers and the people behind them. It's in Mountain View. What a surprise, California. And now for a bit of housekeeping and announcements. Thank you for listening to this episode of mintCast. If you see something you'd like to hear about, tell us. Send us an email at mintcast@mintcast.org. Join us live on YouTube. Post at the mintcast subreddit. Chat with us directly on Telegram and Discord, or post directly on the https mintcast.org. Our next episode is at 2 p.m. US Central Time on Sunday, September the 3rd, 2023, and there's a link to get that converted to your time zone in the show notes. The next roundtable stream will be at 2 p.m. US Central Time on Saturday, August 26th, and there is a link to get that converted to your time zone in the show notes. The next roundtable live stream will be at 2 p.m. US Central Time on Saturday, September 9th, and there's a link to that in the to get that converted to your time zone in the show notes. Live stream information is at mintcast.org/livestream. So, wrapping up, Bill, where can we find you?
Well, you can email me, bill@mintcast.org. I'm bill_h on Discord. I'm at WCHauser3 at fostodon.org on Mastodon. Also, check out my other two podcasts, Linux OTC and Three Fat Truckers. There's links to both of those in the show notes.
And if you want to get hold of me, you can email me at drmajid@mintcast.org. You can tweet on, or Zeet, or whatever it is, whatever Twitter's called these days, at typical doctor. I know. I'm actually really tempted to just delete my Twitter account now.
I didn't delete the account, but I uninstalled the app, so I am, by all intents and purposes, off of whatever you want to call it now. Running for all I care.
And also Atypical Anesthetist on Instagram and Threads, and the Atypical Anesthetist podcast on Spotify. Before we leave, we want to make sure we acknowledge some of the people who make mintCast possible. Bill, let's be honest, you're the one doing the audio editing.
Yeah.
So let's just, and now that Moss isn't here to kind of, decry the fact that we haven't got an audio editor, we can just say, we'll thank Bill for our audio editing.
Real quick though, let's mention if you want to get a hold of Joe.
Yes, if you want to get hold of Joe, he's on the tilts.org, Linux Lookcast, MeWe, jb@mintcast.org, and you can buy him a coffee. Links in the show notes. If you want to get hold of Moss, Well, he's on Full Circle Weekly News. He's on Distro Hoppers Digest. He's on Bardmoss at pm.me. He's also on Mastodon at Zyvella at hosttux.social. And his other contact information can be found on itsmoss.com. The fact that he has a website which has his contact information just shows that Moss is just so much far ahead of the game compared to everyone else.
He is approachable. Let me tell you.
Damn right, man. You can get hold of him whenever. But yes, anyway, so we're thanking Bill for the audio editing. We're thanking archive.org for hosting our audio files. Hubstar for our logo. Unedited for the animated Discord logo. Londoner for our time sinks and various other contributions. He really is the Svengali. He is the man behind the scenes. He is what makes mintCast happen.
That's why I added that various other contributions to the whole
Yeah,
thing.
he's the man. He's the man.
To just say, thanks for the time sinks, because I don't even know what that is. But
yeah. Well, if you don't know what it is, then we're in a problem.
I mean, he seems to. I don't know all the things that he contributes. I don't think we were doing a good enough job to thank him. So yeah.
Oh yeah, no,
time.
100%. Thanks, Londoner. And we'll thank Bill again for hosting the server which runs our website maintenance, the Nextcloud server on which we host our show notes and raw audio.
Oh, shucks.
And of course, the Linux Mint development team for the fine distro we love to talk about. Thanks,
Clem. And co.
And that's a wrap.
Oh, good show, mate.
That was good fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, I like that. I felt less